Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome. Super excited. Okay, listen. Joseph, who I'm going to be interviewing in a moment, got on my radar in a really unique way. If you do something in the world and someone reaches out to let you know they like it is memorable. I think every content creator out there wishes they had someone like Joseph in their audience who steps out of the many to become one. And here, without further delay, I'm going to introduce you to today's guest. Today's guest is all about relationship building. He has created a unique twist to networking that transforms how and why professionals meet one another. After years of successfully growing his business through networking, he and his wife, Carol, founded 0 to 100, an inclusive networking movement that operates on a global scale. Focused on fostering a sense of belonging and gratitude and rooted in developing genuine and authentic connections in business and life, the movement includes books, networking events, and proprietary digital platform. He's been recognized by the business community locally and abroad through numerous publications and awards, most recently, Marquis' Who's Who in America. He made history in 2021, becoming the first African American in St. Charles, Missouri's 250-year history to receive the key to the city for his accomplishments and contributions to the well-being and success of their business community. Joseph, welcome on the Schmooze.
Thank you so much for having me, Robbie.
My gosh, I now I'm gonna have to put key to the city as a list of the things I have on my bucket list. Didn't even think to ask for that. Well done on you. So as you know, this is a show about building strong networks, and the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Leadership is said best by John Maxwell, which is the ability to gain followers. It is the ability to speak something and do something and have those two working congruently. Somebody who knows the way, somebody who goes the way, but more importantly, has the vision in terms of where they're going. That's the way that I would define leadership.
So, I mean, quoting John Maxwell is a great has a great start. I mean, clearly the man knows what he's doing. When you say like they have a vision, right, and they have so because they're so clear, they then attract the people who want to follow them. Is that sort of like a key component? Like if you have no one following you, then there's no visible leadership.
Correct, because people want to belong to something, but if you exude a high level of leadership, like many of the greats, historically speaking, leadership is inevitable and people will inevitably follow you. But more importantly, if you have a vision, meaning you already know where you're going, you understand the end goal per se, and you're able to clearly define that. That is, I would say, an attribute of leadership.
That's awesome. So when did you start to realize you had some of these attributes?
So there's a book called The Purpose Driven Life. And I remember when I was first exposed to the book, and one of the things that I did was I rallied my entire family together, my immediate family together. And at the very beginning of the book, it has like a declaration of where you sign your name to commit to reading the book for 40 days straight. And at that very moment, I realized that I had the ability to lead people. And what better way to do it than starting with my family? So leading my family on a journey, whether they believed in the book or not, just leading them down a road of just really good information.
How old were you at that time?
I would say teenager.
Wow.
I would
Yeah.
say I was a teenager.
Yep. And is this Rick Warren's book? Is that the one you're referring to?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Phenomenal book.
Wow, that's really cool. What how did that book end up in your path as a teenager? It doesn't seem like, you know, common reading material.
A friend of mine, one of my best friends, matter of fact, was actually reading it. We were in his truck. He showed me the book that he was reading. I immediately went to the store to get it. I love when someone can talk about purpose because purpose is the original intent on why something was created.
Mm.
So I just being able to read a book around purpose, because if you have no purpose, then what do you have? And I think that in life you should strive to find what your purpose is.
Oh, I want to wind the clock back just a little bit, Joseph, because if you're the kind of guy as a teenager who has friends who are reading books like this, who then turn you on to it, and then you run off to go get it, and then you go and get your family into committing to reading it as well. what were you like on the playground? Were you quietly observing? Were you organizing friends to play? Did you run for student office? Were you active in a lot of clubs and associations? Did you have to work while you were in school? Like, what were you like as an earlier childhood years?
I was hyper. So when I was 11 years old, I used to take Ritalin. My dad used to give me Ritalin because of how excited I was. And I remember going to school being so excited, climbing up the walls in a literal sense, and getting sent home. And at that, there was a moment that my dad was giving me the medicine, and I said to him, before I take this, if I learn to control my level of excitement, do I still have to take this? And he said, no. And so I realized at that very moment that if I can learn to direct all of this energy, all of this passion, all of this excitement into just a different direction and understand how to turn it off and how to turn it on, and also mirror match who I'm talking to, I understood at that very moment how powerful the mind was, how powerful the brain was. But in school, on the playground, I wouldn't say I was doing any of what you were talking about. Yes, I did play kickball. Yes, I had friends that played kickball. I wasn't in any student organizations or student clubs. I wish that I was. I wasn't. School was tough. I was in slow classes. I was one of however many African Americans in my elementary school, middle school, high school. So I'm a different guy than what I was way back when. And I would also say, Robbie, that the guy that you see today was that same guy in that same breath way back when. The difference is, I guess I was more of an observer, and I didn't speak as much. And I'm still an observer today, just in a different way. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. So it sounds like, what you first described seems like, a kid with ADD or a hyperactivity disorder of some kind. Like you're just full of verve and energy. I have a kid who's like that. So, it's really hard to channel that. And I think, and my kid's not quite 11. So, that I'm hoping in a few more years that idea like, oh, I have control over my own mind. Like that's a very striking thing to understand as a child. I think there's still adults who don't fully appreciate that they have that, and they relinquish that to other people or other substances. So you wanted to kind of be your own person even back then. You were it sounds like you were kind of quietly observing kind of what was going on. How do you, I mean, particularly like 11 means you're around the corner from puberty, teenage angst. How did you do trying to like channel that energy and not physically be climbing walls and getting in trouble for it? Did you find something to latch onto to help you?
What I would say in that, because that's a multifaceted question. I played video games a lot as a kid as well. So channeling energy into video games, wanting to pursue things within that space. And then I would also say number two, I never needed anyone's validation. What that means is I never needed my mom or my dad to validate what I was doing to say it was okay. I validated myself. And as a byproduct of that, if my mom or dad validated it, that was just a bonus. So I've always been that way in my entire life. And I have a high level of discipline. I'm a guy that can do things cold turkey. So I don't think that one needs to wean themselves off of whatever they're doing. I think you should just do it, make it up in your mind, commit to what it is that you said you're going to do. And from that, the rest is history.
11, 12 years old, did you have a sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Was there a path in front of you?
A path. Was there a path when I was a kid? To some degree, there were things I always questioned. I questioned to go to school, get good grades, get out, you get this job, and you work that job until you're 50, 60 years old. You retire for 10, 15 years, that you get to live on all of the work that you put in years ago. I questioned that entire deal. So it was more so finishing school. That was exciting to me, being able to go through elementary school, middle school, high school. That was exciting. And I view that from a racial perspective, because typically speaking, people that are African Americans typically grow up in a broken household. And I had the fortune to where I didn't grow up in a broken household. My mom and dad were married until the day they both died. So I got an opportunity to see what a unit looked like in that regard. Robbie, I'm also adopted. So I was blessed to not have to go to multiple homes. I was adopted directly out of the hospital. So I had that working in my favor. And I would also say that I'd never done a drug, never had alcohol. So the cards that I've been dealt with, I can say that I'm truly blessed in that regard and never struggled with any of those demons per se. It was just the cards I was dealt. And I'm honored and grateful to have those cards.
Yeah, it's amazing that you're able to turn what sounds like challenging situations and a challenging origin story to one of triumph. So it's not, oh, I was adopted, which some people would then say I wasn't wanted. You were like, no, 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 I was really wanted, and then I had a great family, and like they loved each other, and I got great role models. I
Mhm.
got set up to have a live, this great life, and I chose to participate in this way. So it's real mindset. I mean, I feel like again, your exact life situation given to somebody else who had a very different mindset would probably have come out of it with a different understanding of how the world works and how the good or not of the world.
Absolutely. I would agree. It happens all the time. People that are in the foster care system, they go from one house to another, to another, to another. And in
Yeah,
some respects, with the hopes that there's a family that will fall in love with them and want to adopt them and
right.
integrate them into the family. But in my case, I didn't have to go from one house to another. I was only in one house and then was adopted.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Um, so at 12, did you think I know I'm going to be a certain thing? Like was college part of the plan? Were you going to go right to the workforce? It sounded like the plan of like, work X number of years and then retire wasn't really your thing. But was there something you were passionate about?
Video games, way back when,
Yeah.
yeah, it was video games. I loved my favorite genre is fighting games. Favorite game I would say was Killer Instinct, and then second would be Mortal Kombat.
Did
Third,
did you know anyone who was going to get paid doing that?
well, I was in a commercial way back when. So do you remember when they had Sega Channel?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So I happened to get really good at it. I happened to go up to Charter at that time to be invited to be a part of a commercial based on how good I was. And I also won a competition way back when. So did I believe there was something in the future for that?
Cool.
Yes, yes, I did. But that wasn't something where it wasn't my North Star. It wasn't something I
Mhm.
was going to do and then retire doing it. I didn't even think that far out per se, because there was a lot of little things in the middle that were really valuable to me, such as obtaining a library card, understanding the value of a library, understanding the banking system, things that I just was not taught, but would learn from friends and learn by observation in movies. There were things that were just so exciting besides figuring out what I'm going to be doing from a career path perspective.
What happened at the end of high school? What was the plan
went
after
direct
that?
went directly to college.
Mhm.
So I went to St. Charles Community College here, and then I also went to a university. I went a total of probably 3.5 years or so in pursuit of international business with a minor in Spanish and sign language. That's what I was in pursuit of.
Mhm. And something knocked you off course?
I got an opportunity in 2006 to be flown to California to teach breakdancing. And so January 2006, I took the opportunity to go to California. I lived out there for about a year or so. And one of the things that brought me back was the health of my mother. That was
Mhm.
one of the things that brought me back. And
Mhm.
and I would also say something else that played a role within that would have been my thought process around college, because going to college, you're absorbing all of the information. But if you actually put yourself out in the real world, that's the application in a way that college can't give to one.
Yeah. So in the introduction, I shared that you've, built up these businesses, you're great at relationship building. When did that I guess that passion or that skill set really get developed? Was this early on? Did you seek out people to talk to as you were trying to learn and grow and figure out your place in life?
I would say one of my quotes is everyone you meet is your future. So if you are a person that lacks confidence and I'm sitting in front of somebody who has confidence, I get to see what the physical walking example of what confidence looks like. So when did it develop in terms of relationship building? I would say when I was introduced to business networking back in 2010. I'd never seen anything like that. I never knew that a space like that existed. And and also it's endless from a racial and cultural perspective, because everybody has a philosophy, everybody has an approach to the space. So endlessly you can learn and apply those different things to your game and have an endless game and approach to business networking.
Who introduced you? Like, what was the circumstances that led to you even wanting to learn about business networking?
A friend of mine invited me to an event in 2010. She was uber late. I got there early. I'm standing in line at an event, and the people that were working the sign-in table talked to every single person that came up to sign in. And when it came time for me to sign in, no one behind that table spoke to me. And I sat between two guys who never spoke to me either. I was notified about 2 or 3 weeks later they weren't used to having African Americans or minorities to be a part of their event. And I realized quickly, every room that I walked into from a business networking perspective, it didn't look like me. It missed the blind, deaf part of hearing. It missed the mark. And even today, that is an enigma that most, from a business networking perspective, have not figured out. That's why it's over indexed looking one way versus looking like a big melting pot.
This is so interesting. So your first experience with business networking sounds like not a good one. So how did that not just turn you off to the whole thing? So, I talk often about the difference between inviting people and welcoming them. So you were invited to come to something by a friend who then
Sure.
wasn't there to greet you, but then people were not welcoming. So how did you not just be like, whatever?
Well, just because you go to Starbucks and you get a bag of coffee doesn't mean the whole business is broken. So I'm a very forgiving person. And I was excited to even be exposed to something like that. And at that time, I thought that networking like this only existed in my community, kind of like living in Maine, you're exposed to fresh lobster. So I never knew that networking existed globally. I never knew that. But once I found that out, I realized, wow, this is massive. And it also tapped into the love that I have for humans. But what I quickly realized was there wasn't a universal process that I could plug into, you could plug into, and maybe you're a part of an open networking organization and I'm a part of a closed networking organization. But there wasn't some information that both of us could tap into, utilize that's been measured and produce a measurable result. And so that is another reason. That is another thing I would say that made me not be turned off. It just showed me opportunity, because many were after the same thing that I was after. Some knew it consciously, others knew it subconsciously.
I gotta say that's still another piece that goes back to sort of mindset in the world, because those not so subtle microaggressions that you live with even when you're ordering a drink from Starbucks, right? Like, race doesn't go away, and to have that so overtly happen, in due to their discomfort or whatever you might use to try to explain their rudeness, but for you to say, "Oh, there's an opportunity here," that's very entrepreneurial. What were you in the market to network about at the time? Were you in a business that sort of would be helped along? Like, what even led you to think, "Oh, networking might be beneficial in this moment in my career or business"?
What led me, I was at that time, I was in the business of coffee. So we had free coffee and tea samples. So that was the business that I was in. But what I realized, after someone would say, become a client of the product, they wouldn't ask me anymore about the product. They would ask me more about networking, because people were quite smitten, per se, on my approach to networking. So I'd find myself in a position to giving networking advice. They would then utilize that advice. They would obtain a result, and they would come back and tell me the next time we would have a caffeinated moment. And then I would give them another answer to another question that they would provide. And that consistently grew, and many people continuously asked me questions around networking. So I realized how big of a demand it was to teach people about the business networking model, but in general, business networking.
So fascinating. So here you are doing sales around coffee,
Mhm.
but your customers start to ask you or recognize that you have this like expertise or at least thoughtfulness around networking, and start tapping into that part of your brain. And that helps you. That's how you start to realize that there's something here. I'm always curious when people start to realize that networking is something that is an actual skill that they could teach and also how they figure out how to make money off of it. Because I struggled with this myself. I mean, you've read my first book, Croissants versus Bagels, Strategic, Effective, and Inclusive Networking at Conferences. I was teaching networking for like 7 years before that book came out. And I was able to get speaking opportunities, but turning it into a coaching offer, really, I mean, my second book, I wrote about that experience of trying to figure out who that was for, because networking could be for everybody, but not everybody wants to pay for it. How did you start to figure out who were these people? I mean, clearly they were coming to you. Like, how do you figure out how to monetize the skill set that you've developed and turn it into a system and a process that you can keep sharing and repeating with other people?
What I would tell you is I would move from coaching to consulting. So it's one thing to coach, it's another to consult. And I'm quite critical when it comes to the word coaching, because most people that coach have never actually done what they're actually coaching on, or they don't actually have any real clients. And so how do I plan on monetizing that? Simple. 0 to 100 is being put in place specifically for that, to be able to teach people how to network efficiently and effectively. And by us just focusing on creating better networkers from a micro perspective, we create better entrepreneurs, better outside sales reps, better human beings. And then from a macro perspective, say you're the president of, say, a chamber of commerce, we get to help you lower your attrition and retention. And so we position the networker to make more money. We position the networking organization to make more money, ultimately positioning 0 to 100 to work with every networking organization across the globe. So you would just simply send your networking friends to 0 to 100, plug them into what we do have. And by way of that, we get to send them back to whatever networking organization they are a part of, thriving in a way that they're not thriving currently today.
So I heard business development and I heard member retention as sort of two outcomes that come from the way you've developed your program, and who the people who are attracted to those outcomes are the people that would really be excited to work with you. And I think that's helpful distinction, because again, a lot of people struggle with networking, but not as many people find it to be something they want to develop as a skill set. But if there is an outcome like that, like business development or member retention, that is very appealing to them, I think then they were willing to put the effort in to figure out, what is this process? How do I do it? How did you start to suss that out? I mean, 2010, now we're 13 years later. So 2010, you were selling coffee, you start getting asked all this advice. How did you shifted that into the business? And I know Carol, your wife, is part of this as well, but how did the two of you really develop this process? At what point did this become the main focus of the business? Like, how many years ago did this become, the business of the work you do?
2018, January 28, 2018 is when I would say first embarked upon the journey of wanting to develop this, would be that time. And I would also say to you, going back to 2010 up to present day, I didn't know I was going to create a business networking business per se, specifically focused on the educational aspect of business networking. I didn't know that way back when. But what I also realized was that it'd be amazing to be paid a professional networker, to get paid to take people to lunch, breakfast, or dinner, actively listen, and then also listen to respond and connect those individuals to resources to help them do what they're already doing, but in a better way. And you also mentioned something too, Robbie, that you mentioned along the lines, most people don't know they want to network better until you ask them or pose that question to them, because they only believe there's only one way to do it. So if you ask the majority of the people that you sit down with, if there was a way for you to do what you're doing, but in a more efficient and effective way, I would tell you the majority of them would say yes, whether they are a novice or they are a veteran. They would say yes to that. Which segues directly to my wife and I. We are polar opposite. My wife is not a person that's in love with networking, whereas I'm a person that's in love with networking. But we also are private in that same breath with different elements or aspects of our life.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I mean, the fact that you shifted this focus, 8 years of having people pick your brain, basically, 8 years of you helping people out, right? Like, just as a byproduct of who you are in the world and how you're curious and you like to teach and you're good at learning and sharing what you've learned. And then you just say, okay, this is going to become an actual business. I'm creating a process. So 2 years later, the pandemic hits. How did the shift to virtual, if at all, did it impact the way you were approaching your business?
Very much so. So we already had years worth of plans already laid out. And so when 2020 happened, all we simply did was look at our existing 2, 3, 4 year plans, and we just modified it based on the current landscape of business. And so it allowed us to come out even stronger than what we were already going to come out to do. And did I ever think that we were going to be destroyed by the pandemic? Absolutely not. I knew that we would come out standing 10 feet tall. And then all of the things that were transpiring over that time of 2020, 2021, and then you had the whole racial aspect, which 0 to 100 is rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that ties directly into our core values, which are the acronym BIG. B stands for belonging, meaning everyone's voice matters. I stands for inclusive, meaning everyone has a seat at our table. And G is my favorite word, gratitude, being grateful and thankful for the I and the B. Without those 2 letters, we wouldn't have any core values. So the 2020 just highlighted what we were already doing.
Yeah, a lot happened that year, and particularly, you're living in a space that is multiracial, has a long history of race. I know noted in your introduction that you have been very well received and recognized. It's interesting to think about how, in 2010, people didn't know how to even greet you properly at a networking event. And then, years later, you're getting the key to the city because of the work you've done on behalf of the business, local business area. What was that trajectory like for you on a personal level to go and now, like, to be someone who's really transformed the landscape, not just for you, but for a lot of other people of color, a lot of other Black people who are living in the area? Has there been a shift, or are there more integrated networking events now, or like how has that impact sort of shown up in the real world?
How has that shown up? I would say yes. It has changed the way people view business networking, especially those that want to explore why it is an enigma when you walk into a room. It doesn't have blind, deaf, hard of hearing. So there are people that very much want to discuss that and are consciously aware that that does exist. And so to be able to have a book, which puts me in a position of authority per se, and to be able to reference specific things, it's been, I would say, transformational for me, and I would also say transformational for some of the people that know me. And Robbie, there's something else I must note. When I first started networking, I set out to achieve a very large goal, which is to create this story. There's a saying, story sell, facts tell. So in 90 days, my goal when I first began networking was to meet and schedule 500 cups of coffee in 90 days. And I did it in 74 days. And then 45 days thereafter, I had another 500 meetings that took place. And the objective was to, when I would meet with you, I would take notes in terms of what questions you specifically asked me, what questions I asked you. It would also be, did you greet me? Did I greet you? What kind of coffee you consume? So it was really understanding and studying the space of business networking. And by way of doing that, I've been able to put a book together that covers the whole gamut on networking, regardless of the gender-based group you're in, regardless of the religious-based group you're in, regardless of if it's closed or open, structured or unstructured. 0 to 100 is a bulk of information from a business networking perspective that is universal to all.
All right, I got to go back to this 500 cups of coffee in 74 days and then another 545 days later, in person, right? So this is 2018 timeframe?
No, this is when I first began networking in 2010.
Okay, so you didn't know anybody. So this is really fascinating. How do you find 1,000 people who are willing to meet you for a cup of coffee in roughly, 6 weeks, like, or 9 weeks or whatever it was? So
yeah,
where are you
over
finding
100.
people?
Well over 100 days. It was 74 days, and then 45 days thereafter. Absolutely. And to answer your question, how do you find? those individuals. Well, if you are giving value to somebody and you've had an incredible experience with someone, they will run through a brick wall to tell everybody in their network that you have to meet this guy.
Mm.
And so I knew that I brought my belief system to the table, meaning I outbelieved people. So I would often tell people to borrow my belief system until they got their own. Number two, I knew that I would out introduce you to more people than you've ever met in your entire life based on people being naturally attracted to me. And I knew in the space of business networking at that time, most people aren't being warmly introduced to anyone. They don't even know what that even looks like. And those same people that don't know what it looks like show up at events by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So when I would meet with somebody and I would give them the Joseph Luckett experience, I would have 4 to 5 days each and every week where I was having a warm introduction to Sue, John, Billy, or Mike. And then all of the new people that I was meeting, I was then recycling those individuals to meet the new people that I was being warmly introduced to. And if you do that long enough, you'll hit you'll hit something called compounding interest per se, but in the context of networking.
Right. The
So
relationships.
that's how. Well over 1,000 people, and even today, consistently warm introductions happening without me having to go to a networking organization. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sure beats the idea of walking to a room cold and not knowing anyone. I often put myself in the experience of being a newbie now and again because I'm usually the host, and it's a very different experience when you're hosting all the time or speaking or something. So I attended a new association chapter meeting, but beforehand, I reached out, found someone on their board, asked about their newsletter, offered to write content for their newsletter, got connected to that person, had an article come out in their newsletter in January. A week later, went to my first meeting, sought out, was trying to find that particular person that I knew from the board. I vaguely met one person, but then had worked with his newsletter person. On my way to trying to find them, was asking around to meet. I knew all the board member name tags, so meet all the board member people, take selfies with all the board people. Before my second meeting, and another article in the newsletter, I shared on Facebook and LinkedIn the selfies. And I'm not a big selfie person, but like I was like, hey, it was really great seeing all these people. I'll be back again. So by like the second meeting, they're like, will you join the board? I was like, no, I can't do that. Like when people show up in that like boom kind of way, they're so surprised. I really like by the third meeting, really connected with a bunch of people. And I actually made a really good friend from that who I still stay in touch with years later. So I think that the same effort to go 3 times over a year and a half versus 3 really show up kind of ways, like, you get really present. And then you can have all those coffees and stuff to get to know people outside of those meetings too. And now virtually we can do Zoom calls as well, which is wonderful. I'm curious, I have a specific question. What year did you write your book? Because you keep referencing the book, and that is a pivotal thing in a business, is to come up with a book like that. I think it really does elevate how people perceive you. So when did the book come out?
April 2021 is when it launched.
Yeah, so the middle of the pandemic, you pulled off writing a book. Cool. Yeah, and how has life changed since having the book?
Immensely. So, as you and I both know, networking is not something that's taught in school. So I would have to say the support of my community. So my elementary school has it in the teacher's lounge. My high school has it in the library for current and future students. My college has brought it in as well. That was as of 3 or 4 weeks ago. We have another major university that's bringing it in to do some very unique things as well. The mayor has also, of my community, has endorsed the book. And then it's backed by the GOAT of business networking, Ivan Meisner of Business Networking International, along with Stephen David Elliott, who owns the largest networking organization in the world from a happy hour perspective, so on and so forth. So it's been life-changing in that regard because the book does all the talking for me.
Right. Yeah, it just opens doors. It's a great, it's an extended business card in a lot of ways. Adds value, great leave away, so people can be left with information. That's really cool. This paves the way for you. So when it comes to actually your own personal networking, I've heard a little bit about it, but you've got that sort of inner circle of people that you're going to stay in touch with. And then I always wonder about that sort of second and third tier or layers out, people that you might see once a year at a conference, or maybe you worked together 5 years ago, but you haven't had a reason to since. Oh, and you like these people and they like you. Let's just preface with that. How do you think about nurturing and sustaining those kinds of connections with those weaker ties?
I'm going to give you two things that you can do. One, you can do some double, triple, and quad dating. That's a touch point. And then two, if you're a person that goes to the gym, you can have some of those individuals join you in the gym. And so that would be two different touch points that you could do to put in place.
Explain that first one.
The double dating. So what we typically do is we bring couples together, and maybe they only know Joseph. And so I bring individuals together based on their behavior style and based on their personality. I typically will bring those individuals together where we're sitting and eating, and then I get to put myself in the position of what you reference as a host, and I get to introduce the various couples together, knowing that I've already had coffee with every one of those individuals at the table. So I know their interests, I know they're going to be quite deep. And from that point, life happens and they start to do life amongst each other, which is a natural touch point. And then some of those same people are now connecting on Facebook. And then if I make a post, both of them are in the comment section commenting on what I'm saying. And I was the one that brought them together, which consistently gels everybody together. So you have an endless touch point.
So are these just you and one other couple, or are these dinner parties that you're gathering people around? Or like, what's the structure?
Structure is picking a restaurant, and it could be one couple or it could be 12 couples. Mm-hmm. And we're bringing them together. So I wouldn't say it's a dinner party. It's just one of the things that's very intimate to me and special to me is sharing a meal with someone, because that's a very personal thing. And so I know that the objective is not just to meet you one time. The objective is how do we put things or how do we put things in place to be able to stay in contact with each other so you're just not a great Facebook memory. So consistently thinking about that.
Did any of your strategies shift as the pandemic shut down the opportunity to meet indoors in restaurants? Like, did you shift to any kind of virtual opportunities to do this kind of thing?
Sure did. But I was already doing the virtual aspect of networking way before the pandemic ever happened. So, the 2020 just echoed something that I had already been doing. 2020 made people pay attention to the person. It wasn't showing up at their chamber every week and going through the motion. It actually made you pay attention to Robbie and ask personally how you're doing, how your family's doing. And that to me is the crux of business networking. You should be wanting to know about that person on a personal level. And as a byproduct, you'll naturally learn about what they're doing in business.
So other than hosting gatherings in person, inviting people to come hang out with you at the gym, those are all sort of higher touch points. Is there other stuff like habits, philosophies, or practices that you've employed? Like, do you use a CRM or a spreadsheet? Like, how do you track thousands of people that you've had one-on-one contacts with and make sure to circle back to them in some sort of interval? Is there some process you're doing to keep track of all this?
I don't use a CRM system because there's always a new CRM system. So I don't use a CRM system. I do have my phone categorized by industry. So there's about 84 different industries. So I have different categories. So when I'm meeting somebody, I slot them directly into that particular category. And then there is an event that I had years ago called a thank you event where I invited people to a room, paid for their food, and none of them knew why they were there. And the objective was, one, to introduce everybody that was in the room that has made me feel a certain way, and then also tell them how much they mean to me. So that was an incredibly large touch point. And then throughout the year, there's different, maybe a post or so where I'm highlighting different people that have really truly touched me. And then in December is my gratitude month where I don't do any networking. It is my time to look over my entire year of canceled meetings reschedule meetings. It's my time to send out handwritten postcards to the people that I met that have truly touched me over the years. It's my time to review my calendar for the following year. I typically start working on that in October. So December is my month of gratitude. Go out on doing meetings. And the only time I do a meeting isn't that if there's a meeting that I have to take that can't wait till the following year.
Mm-hmm. How long have you been spending December doing that?
Well over a decade.
Wow. That's really great.
Well over a decade.
Yeah. And you mentioned your wife. So how long have you two been married?
We have been married 9 years as of March 2nd this year.
You've both grown a lot. I mean, this is just what we've talked about since 2010. So much has happened, and to have someone like that by your side, wanting to, co-host these meals and go out and do these things together, be part of your business. And I feel like, when you marry well, it makes a huge difference. People get you and believe in you.
Absolutely.
So a year from now, I realize, hey, it's been a year, Joseph, since you and I sat down and have that conversation. I'm gonna want to know a year from now, hey, what are you celebrating? What are you looking like? What are the big things we're gonna be toasting to a year from now? What are you most looking forward to?
What am I most looking forward to? I would say the different announcements that we do have. So you said a year from today, we are in March. So March next year, we would have had 1, 2, 3 different major announcements happen. That's what we will be toasting to. It's 3 other elements of our 0 to 100 business model.
Are you gonna give us a sneak peek to any of them?
Can't give you a sneak peek.
And that's a cliffhanger if there ever was one. Folks, you're gonna have to stay tuned. Speaking of which, how can folks find you and follow your work?
Joseph Luckett on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Reddit, on Pinterest, and also on Alignable. I can be found there under the same name, Joseph Luckett.
Great. We'll put all those links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Joseph Luckett, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Robbie.